Tēnā koutou katoa, kua hono mai nei ki tēnei momo wānanga mō ngā pūtea hou o Irirangi o te motu, ko te Arua, ko Ngāti Pikiao, ko Ngāti Whakahemo, ko Ngaitirangi ngā iwi, ko he perimita tōku ingoa, he kai tohu pūtea ahau mō Irirangi te motu. Hello and welcome everybody to this webinar on public interest journalism funding. My name is Heperi Mita and I'm a funding advisor for New Zealand On Air. We're going to begin this session by going around the table and introducing ourselves before cracking into the specifics of this Q&A. We'll start over here on this side.
Kia ora tātou, ko Glenn Asma Tokawengawa. I'm the Associate Head of Funding at New Zealand On Air and probably your first port of call regarding applications. Kia koe, my colleague.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Alana Califa-Taylor aho, he kei whakahaere whakapā aho. I'm the Head of Communications here and I'm the person probably many of you have been communicating with to date as I've been running the journalism inbox. And yeah, I'm a former journalist as well, so I have a little bit of experience, a couple of decades under my belt for that. Kia koe, Sophie.
Kia ora, ko Sophie tōku ingoa, he ngaio whakawhitiwhiti kōrero aho. I'm Sophie, I'm the communications advisor here, and I'm going to be assisting with the tech side of things today, but I'm also available for any questions you might have afterwards if you'd like to send them through. Kia koe, Connell.
Kia ora koutou, ko Connell Air tuku ingoa, he kaiawhina kirimana aho no Irirangi te motu. So I'm the Business Affairs Assistant here at New Zealand On Air, part of the funding team, and my main job is the kind of drafting of various funding agreements for projects that we fund.
I'm going to offer also two apologies. First is Amy, who is currently on leave at the moment. She's the head of funding for New Zealand On Air. The second is Raywin Welsh, who is the head of journalism. She has yet to begin her role, but will be on board very soon. So I'm issuing apologies on their behalf. Before we continue, I'm just going to throw to Connell for some housekeeping.
Yeah, just quickly, if you guys do have any questions throughout, I know that some of you have sent questions in advance and we're going to endeavour to answer those today. But if you have any questions during the session, just use the chat function and we'll keep an eye on that. We're just trying to figure out how to just get our video. So if you did want to turn your video off so that it just ends up being us, that could possibly be helpful so that we're kind of just on the screen. The other thing, I've just seen there is a question around the session being recorded. It is being recorded, so we will be able to provide a recording of that at a later date. Anything we can't answer due to not having the answer or not having the time, we'll endeavour to answer at a later date, and we'll provide kind of a Q&A sheet on our website. But yeah, just if you do have a question, use the chat function rather than speaking over the microphone, though we might have, if we have time at the end, we might get those kind of questions going. But in the first instance, just write them in. Just now going to pass over to Alana.
Kia ora, Connell. So I'm just going to quickly set the scene with a quick recap of where we've got to and how we've got here. So a huge amount of mahi went in last year, kicking off during lockdown, with basically just trying to convince the government to give some money to the journalism sector, really. That was about 9 months worth of mahi, and that led up to that announcement on the 12th of February, about 55 million for NZ On Air to distribute over the next 2.25 years. Since that date, we've done some quickfire consultation, which some of you have been involved in. We've done some more in-depth consultation via Te Amakura Consulting with the Māori and iwi media sector, and some of that consultation work is ongoing. And we have done also some quickfire consultation on the eligibility assessment and public interest journalism definition. And we've issued the first round guidelines, which is why we are here today. I just wanted to quickly kind of just, I guess, set the scene around the ability to be flexible with this fund. Obviously, we are directed by the cabinet paper that gives us the 55 million, and in designing those documents that you've seen to date, we have had to have regards to what the paper asks us to do or directs us to do, and we have checked back through the channels up to the minister that we've got it right, and so far so good. However, going forward, it's an iterative process. Oh, going forward, I can't believe I said that. It's an iterative process, and what that means in reality is that we need the flexibility to be able to look round upon round on what we're getting in and respond accordingly. There may be tweaks that need to be made to different parts of the criteria and how we assess. And in addition to that, we may also need to observe gaps and plug them as we go through. So what that means is if, for example, we don't see a very good spread of applications across local, regional, national, targeted audiences, we might decide to do a specific call out in a future round to fill a gap where there's a need. So yeah, it's going to be a constantly evolving thing. Also, just to sort of restate, I think we said in the original invitation that this webinar is intended for those with little to no understanding about how to apply for funding with NZ On Air. We recognise that for quite a few of you, this is a totally new process. And so there are some very wise heads here who've been handling this stuff for a long time in other spaces and will be able to help. So we're going to get started with some of the questions that have already been emailed in, and then we'll start getting to some of the ones that are coming in on screen as well at the moment. So we've got a first question here that says, we're preparing application for the fund and want to know when NZ On Air would need the completed project to be delivered by. This is for project application funding. And I think Connell's going to answer that.
Yeah, and the answer is that there's no set time frame. It's very much project dependent, and really a result of the work you're trying to achieve through your project. What we do often expect to see is a kind of production or project schedule around when certain kind of, I guess, production milestones. Sorry if I keep using the word production. That's just kind of ingrained into my head to use that word. Project milestones, you know, such as research, it's video or audio editing, you know, kind of moving right through to delivery. You might not have a solid concrete idea of what that schedule looks like at the time of applying, but a rough indication at this point is very helpful from our perspective. But if you were successful and it got to contracting, at that stage we would require to see a production schedule, and that might be kind of done on a weekly or possibly monthly basis.
And if I can jump in there too, so one of the early questions that I dealt with from somebody through the journalism inbox who'd never applied for funding before, just to be really clear, we don't write you out a check the day that the funding's approved and go, here you go, ta-ta, tell us how it went later. There are drawdown milestones within the contracts, as Connell said, and so you'll get the funding as a staged payments as you report back to us how you're going. That's how we protect the taxpayer funds. Right, next question.
Number 2, I think I can do that.
Yeah.
So this question is, there is a form to fill in to register. Does that automatically mean we have registered as a platform publisher? Do we have to register as a platform publisher too, or must it be done separately? So in ERIC, there is...
Not ERIC.
Okay, sorry.
Online application portal.
Online application portal, which we internally call ERIC. There is 2 places you can register on the login page. The left-hand side is for content providers. That is people who are making content. The right-hand side is for, at the bottom, is if you are going to be a platform and you are going to be supporting applications from other people to make content for your platform. Most people will be registering as a content provider, and if you are going to be making content and putting it on your own platform, you don't have to register as a platform as well. You can just sit in there as a content provider. You really only need to register as a platform if you are going to be commissioning content from outside people that we will contact with directly.
And just to be clear, so we should almost need a glossary of terms for newbies. When we say platforms, we do mean publisher also.
Yeah.
So if you are in the publishing space as opposed to the broadcast platform space,
Yeah.
same thing. Same thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Who's next? Right, so we've got one here. Our organisation provided TV and then tried video production for 5 to 10 years, and we're repositioning now to go back to our primary purpose. Will that track record be recognised? So there is a requirement for a track record, both as a platform and in terms of having provided public interest journalism. Where do we stand on track record where it is in a different space to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think if people have experience, then we recognise that experience. The relevance and currency of that experience obviously plays a part in our overall assessment. But if you know what you're doing and you can demonstrate that, then that is taken on board. And if you haven't been in that space for a little while, but explain how you are still going to be relevant in that space, then that's all good as well.
Part of the track record too, with regards to the platform or publisher, also is being able to demonstrate that you know your path to audience.
Yeah.
So if that is established, then that's kind of like a big tick, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think any application needs to be able to demonstrate that they know the content that they want to make and who that intended audience is, and then the ability to demonstrate how you're going to deliver that content to that audience. And also measure the level of engagement is important for us further down the track.
I would just like to add to that as well in terms of repositioning. The timing of that could be fortuitous in regard to actually if the repositioning is able to capture some of the definitions of public interest journalism as set out in the general guidelines, which are available on our website, and I'm sure the link can be shared around. So part of what this fund is intended to do is to address areas of need that are currently defined as, I think the term is news deserts. Is that correct, Alana? And so in regard to the repositioning, if you can illustrate within your application that repositioning is complementary to the aims of the fund and of public interest journalism, that of course would be a strength.
So another question we have here is, we're a regional television platform. We will have a strong focus on training cadets, cross-sector relationships, multimedia modalities, and sustainability options. Does this meet the focus of industry development? Who'd like to take that?
Off the top of my head, I would say yes. I think if you can demonstrate that you are training people who currently aren't receiving that training or extending someone's career pathway, and the cross-sector collaboration and relationships are really important to us. So the more you can demonstrate that is an added strength to your application.
Yeah.
The fact that you're regional is also a plus, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So a really strong part of the industry development, part of the Public Interest Journalism Fund is that we are about building both capacity and capability within the sector, because one of the things that we heard really strongly through the consultation, and we know from having done the desk research, is that the loss of capability and capacity in the sector over the last decade has been quite extreme, and you only need to look to see how many journalists are coming through that you're able to recruit. That's a problem. So that's what we're trying to address here, but we are very careful that we are not replacing in any way the formal training that's available through the tertiary sector. This is meant to be complementary to. Who's that next one? Hippie, do you want to address number 6?
Yes. So the next question is, our news platform development hinges on hiring additional journalists, general and iwi specific. and also developing our business model by securing a physical newsroom space necessary for training, plus a news manager, as well as specialist legal, accounting, business advice around innovative mechanisms for community journalism funding. Can these aspects all be included in a single industry development application, or should they be distributed across different applications or different categories? Well, this is a very big question, and it sounds like there's some very big plans happening for this particular platform. To kind of take a step back, the fund is basically allocated in 3 strands. First is the project-based funding, which is similar to the New Zealand Media Fund, which New Zealand On Air typically operates. It's for content production specifically. The second is for roles. These are specific roles within a journalistic organization that currently do not exist. And from the tone of this question, I would actually say that funding application for these particular purposes would be more applicable to a role-based round. Now, for this first funding round that is opened, role-based journalism is not currently open. We will be looking at opening more funding rounds further in the future. And as the fund develops and we bring on board the expertise, we're really waiting on the head of journalism and development of that particular fund. So my main recommendation is that a lot of these things listed, such as news manager, such as these specific roles, should actually come to a separate funding round. The Industry Development Fund is more so about training and building capacity. So there has to be some demonstration of the ability to upskill, to bring on cadets, to bring on apprentices, and bring them through a news organization and bring them up to a higher level of professionalism. So there will be, and to answer the question briefly, there will be the opportunity for role-based funding. Unfortunately, that is not in this first funding round of the Public Interest Journalism Fund, but there will be future rounds where those roles can be applied for.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify even further, this fund is not about upscaling a business. It's about either providing content that's currently not provided, training people who currently can't get that training, or providing a role within an organization. So it's not about business expansion per se.
Glenn, I think you've got the next one as well.
Oh, what's that one? Oh, so we are currently funded from the previous New Zealand On Air Regional TV Fund for production of regional documentary series Southern Lens. We want to apply for Series 3 funding for this work, should that application be under the current project round or another channel. Definitely, that's a content outcome, so it should come into the project content round.
And we've got a question here about budget templates for Connell. He's all over this.
Will there be budget templates released, and will you require the budgets to be split similar to how the traditional video funding rounds are, with split above the line and below the line costs? So currently we don't have any budget templates released. In terms of project funding that might have an audio or a visual outcome, the best option is to have that split between above the line and below the line costs.
Connell, can you explain above the line and below the line for the people who come from a part of the industry that don't use that term?
Sure thing. Above the line costs are the costs associated with essentially getting the project to the for lack of a better word, production phase. So that would be maybe an EP, a producer and a director, these kind of key personnel, any development costs that have previously been spent, and that includes research, and there might be, if it's being presented by a certain well-known journalist, that would also be above the line cost, because that's a kind of that person would be a key member of the creative personnel. Below the line are all the kind of project costs around project management, equipment, crew, editing, software editing costs, post-production, general administration, legals, insurance, marketing, so on and so forth. So we would, even for stuff like print, we would expect to see a similar breakdown, just because it gives us a clear indication of how these costs should be treated, and who are deemed kind of the key personnel for the series. Also, in terms of budgets, for those who might not be clear, the budget we expect to see is for costs that are directly related to the creation of content. Now, I'm talking more in terms of our first pillar, which is project funding. So you might have someone in your organization who's going to spend some of their weekly time at your organization working on this project, and then other times not. So we need to see a clear breakdown of the proportion of their time spent going towards this project, and looking at personnel, equipment, facilities, and so on and so forth. We do expect to see their kind of rate, the time spent, and their kind of subtotal cost when it comes to calculating their time or the cost of certain equipment. We don't like seeing kind of budgeted flat lines that leave us with a couple of questions. So the more detail you can provide around hourly, daily, and depending on the thing, weekly costs, the better. And for those shortlisted applications, if you end up being shortlisted through this first funding round, we're likely to come back to you, or we might come back to you with more questions, asking to clarify some things. But yeah, I'll just leave it there.
And also just to sort of, again, reference glossary. So for those of you coming into this from a print background, you may need to apply some lateral thinking to some of the terminology that Connell's using, because obviously we're used to the production sector that deals with screen and audio content. So some of those things you'll need to sort of think, what's the comparator in my industry.
So just another thing to quickly add, thanks, Heather. For print project funding, as Alana said, that is a territory we aren't that well versed in when it comes to looking at budget. So there is a chance, and there is a chance for any project, not just print, that we might provide the budget to an external assessor at some point during the assessment phase, so that we can get expert opinion on whether the costs are reasonable and proportionate and directly related to the project.
Sure, thanks, Connell. The next question is about industry development. It's just asking, can you apply for more than one industry development initiative? I can see there's a cap of 4 for projects, but nothing on industry development. And if I sort of kick off on this, and Glenn might like to add something, I think, you can, but bear in mind that you're putting in 2 projects that are going to compete against each other, and also against all of the other projects in the round. You're probably going to have to decide which one's the one you really want. That would be my advice.
Yeah, and
because it's going to be competitive.
Yeah, and definitely those projects, again, that have cross-sector collaboration are ones that probably would have the inside running, as opposed to one that's just solely sits within one organization.
Yeah, we want to see as much bang for buck as possible is the answer, I guess, with all of this. Hippie, here's one for you on iwi Radio.
1 second.
And
What provisions have been put in place to ensure iwi radio stations and Te Reo Māori journalism is prioritised? Will there be ring-fenced funding for iwi radio stations and all Māori journalism in Te Reo Māori and English? So this is 2 questions, and I'm going to answer them both. The first thing I want to stress is that I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. When the cabinet paper was released, the first year of funding that is $10 million designated to this round. The financial year actually ends July 1st or June 30th. So in order to develop the criteria in that amount of time, a lot of decisions have been made very quickly, and there's further consultation going on with the Māori journalism sector to define and to develop a strategy to service that particular sector and the needs of the Māori journalism sector. And this is an ongoing process, and there'll be further announcements made in the future as that unfolds. So I can't answer the question about ring-fence funding at this point in time. In terms of provisions that have been put in place to ensure iwi radio stations and te reo Māori journalism is prioritized, part of the criteria of the fund is to promote, one of the goals of the fund, and I quote, is actually to promote the treaty and the goals of the treaty. And if you just hold on for 1 second, it is to actively promote the principles of partnership, participation, and active protection under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, acknowledging Māori as a Te Tiriti partner. That is one of the goals of the fund, and that has been written into the DNA of this document and of the guidelines. Also within the actual assessment criteria, projects that meet the definition of Māori and iwi journalism, those are part of the eligibility criteria, and those elements of proposals that meet that need, that actively promote those principles, they will have extra weight due to those elements. I also want to mention the fact that within the Broadcasting Act, which is basically the foundation, the constitution of this organization, that the promotion of Māori language and Māori culture is actually in the first article of the Broadcasting Act. So within the actual assessment criteria, within the definition of public interest journalism, and within the guidelines of the fund, there have been provisions put in for the protection of Māori journalism and te reo Māori within these criteria. So when proposals come in with those elements, they will be viewed favorably on that basis. There will be further development in terms of the Māori strategy in relation to the Public Interest Journalism Fund, and we hope to have those publicly announced in the near.
Okay. Sorry, we hope you're all still with us. We may have just had a slight internet outage here by the sounds of it. Yeah, we're okay. Okay, we will carry on then in that case.
Sorry, can I just quickly interrupt? Can you guys make sure that you are sending your questions through the general chat, not directly?
Sorry, you might want to repeat that.
Just if you guys could ensure that you're ensuring that you're sending through your messages in our general chat, not through direct messages, that would be great. Thank you.
Cool. We'll go on to the next question, I think.
Yeah, number 12. So this is about, does any project we apply for have to...
Let's start with that one. Oh, you can do that one if you want.
Oh, I'll do this one because I've been thinking about it. We'll flip back to that one. So does any project we apply for have to meet every category of a general assessment? The short answer to that is no. Obviously, the more boxes you tick and how closely you align with the goals of the fund, the better your business case will be. But we don't expect everyone to, tick every box all the time. The other half of the question is, if an opportunity for an important project comes up that does not strongly meet one or more of the categories, is it likely to be funded? I guess the answer to that would be it depends on how closely it does align. If it's an important project, but it's an important commercial project, then likely not to be funded. We would expect that to happen anyway. But if, I think we're always open to a conversation about how closely something fits. So if you have something come across your desk, pick up the phone and ask the question, and we will give you the best feedback we can on the day.
Yeah, and this goes back to sort of our original discussions way back when this fund was being designed about what is at-risk journalism and what are the gaps that this fund is trying to fill. And we were quite clear right from the outset that we need the industry to tell us. So you need to tell us and make your case about what is the at-risk component of journalism that you're looking to address here, or what is the deficit that you're addressing, and that makes your case stronger, even if perhaps there's a box you haven't ticked. Yeah.
This one is, I'm writing to have a chat around funding based on individual entity versus national body. This would be both the Student Radio Network and Aotearoa Student Press Association. Both of these have long-standing contributions to the state of New Zealand journalism. I guess I'm not quite sure what the question is asking, but I think the fund certainly highlights and promotes regional, local audience outcomes. I think if there's an opportunity to deliver that, but do it within a holistic whole where you're getting some efficiencies of scale across a national network, that would be a great outcome. It's not to say you can't have a hyper-local application or project that you submit a funding application for, but if there are business efficiencies and distribution efficiencies to be had from collaborating within a wider national organisation, that would be, as I say, a great outcome.
And also specifically with regard to the Student Radio Network, which does get operational funding, you can apply for funding on top of the operational funding, but it needs to be additive to what you're doing. So
And clearly tied to a content outcome.
That's right. To ensure that this isn't seen as double dipping, you need to actually be adding something new. Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. So what do we got?
I've got a 5-page submission.
No, I'll do the next one. Kia ora e hoa ma. Does any project we apply for have to meet every category of the general assessment? Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, just to add to that, actually, I guess the needs of the sector are very broad and very diverse in the different styles of journalism, and the needs and deficits of journalism are very, you can't have a one size sort of fits all answer for those. So if there are elements of the eligibility criteria that a particular proposal has a strength in, if it has deficits in other areas of the eligibility criteria, it will be considered on the basis of its strength and its ability to service a need or an audience or an aspect of the goals of the fund. And therefore, I think it does not necessarily have to meet every part of the eligibility criteria if it does have a particular strength in one area. Sorry for the repetition, team.
Just another one there. Kia ora, how strict are you on the 5-page submission? At the long list stage, fairly strict, given that it's a contestable fund. We want to have even a playing ground and for all applicants, and being able to, present your proposed project or IDF application within the same kind of scope as everyone. If you are then shortlisted, you'll be able to see we provided a funding flowchart which details all the different steps of the application and assessment process. That's when you'd be asked to provide a more detailed proposal beyond that kind of 5-page limit. But in the first instance, 5 pages is what we expect applicants to work to.
Refining your pitch to a defined small number of pages is a really good exercise to get involved in, because it actually helps you crystallize exactly how you're actually meeting the fund, who the audience is that you're serving, how you're going to reach the audience, and why this is a good idea.
Yeah, great. More is not more.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we able to clearly define pitch, public interest journalism, including the obvious aspects that are and are not included? I think we did quite a succinct job of defining pitch in the documentation that we put out. I can't remember where we've got it in that one, Glenn, but
that's the front. This is the general guidelines, basically.
Thank you. Yes.
Tell you all.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It tells you what is and isn't.
Yeah.
Interest journalism, which is
There's no
good
point in us
guideline.
rehashing stuff that you can read on the internet.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure sort of what that person is looking for in terms of clearly defining public interest journalism. I think, again, if you're thinking about this in the context of your application, it's over to you to tell us how what you're applying for meets the definition that we've published of public interest journalism. We've tried not to be overly prescriptive, but there are some obvious areas that we feel are out of play, and that is because they are either not journalism, so you see reference to things like sponsored content, etc., or because they at the moment seem to be at risk. They're well and truly covered within the general sort of news, the daily news sort of sector. So we feel like we've left things open enough. There are a couple of caveats around Māori and iwi journalism, Hepi. So I think we had ruled out political journalism, for example, as being, because we think it's well covered, but in Māori and iwi journalism, it's not, right?
And that would be true of any ethnic minority.
Exactly, yeah. So tell us what it is that you think is missing.
If I may chime in, and if I were to make a broad stab at a definition, I mean, I think for the purposes of the fund, public interest journalism is essentially strands of journalism that have been currently been deemed at risk, as presented by the cabinet paper, as presented by the shrinking of newsrooms, as presented by the, I mean, the impact of the departure of newsrooms from regional areas, the deficit of reporting for diverse communities. These are the areas of at-risk journalism that the Public Interest Journalism Fund looks to address. It also looks to address the deficit of the development of the of talent coming through, of apprenticeships and traineeships. To me, that's my stab at giving the most concise and clear definition of public interest journalism in relation to this fund as I can. There are other elements, there are many, many needs of the industry. As I said before, it's a very, very broad sector. It's a very, very broad industry. So for one fund to meet all of those needs is very, very difficult. And there's a lot of navigation that we've had to do in order to articulate this fund. But as far as I could communicate it concisely, public interest journalism is about journalism that is at threat and that basically focuses on regional and communities. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. And I think there's also sort of that overarching higher level sort of piece about sort of contributing to democracy, which of course is what the Fourth Estate is here for.
Yeah.
So can an organisation make multiple applications to each funding pillar or multiple applications across the funding pillars in every round? So there are 3 different pillars and today we've got 2 open for the fund. Connell, were you expressing an interest in it?
I'm happy to. I'm just trying to recall, I believe we've limited to 4 applications in project funding. And in terms of the IDF funding, it really goes back to what Alana was saying before. You can put in multiple applications, but it's a contestable fund. And we need to be able to be, assured that you're not spreading yourself too thin, and that you're not just throwing, stuff at the wall to see what sticks. But yeah, you can make multiple applications, but it's really just making that case within that 5-page proposal as to why both or multiple applications warrant funding through this fund.
I would also like to elaborate on that. If one organization has an application for content funding and another application for IDF, for development funding, those will be assessed separately by separate criteria for each of those funds. So yes, the short answer is yes. Each pillar is its own category of funding with its own category of assessment criteria. If you're putting multiple applications into one of those pillars, you are essentially competing your own ideas against yourself, which is a risk that you are welcome to take. But if you are spreading your proposals across the different pillars, those will be assessed upon their own merits and upon their own criteria.
Actually, here's a good point to jump in with a question that I've fielded previously, and I think I'd like Glenn to talk to for a moment, and that is, concern that small community-based organisations will be competing against the big media, national media organisations for funding in this fund. And I just wondered, Glenn, if you could explain about how we assess like with like and within sort of tiers.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as Hepi's been explaining, this fund is trying to cover a very broad church of content outcomes. And so when we go through an assessment process, as Alana just said, we do assess like with like, and we don't expect the outcomes for a hyperlocal piece of content to match that something that's been put up on Stuff or NZME, NZ Herald. I mean, those, you know, that's just not reasonable or fair, yeah. So we tend to, if we get a whole lot of applications and they're across a range, we tend to batch them together, like with like. And so if we've got a range of hyperlocal ones, then we'll tend to put those together and assess them as a group, and so that the people who are assessing that batch have a range of different applications to look at across a similar territory.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
that similar territory might be the amount of funding being provided, or the
Yeah.
area, or the
yeah, that's right, or the targeted audience. That's you know, because there could be different diverse outcomes for the content, intended diverse audiences for the content as well.
Yeah. So that's how we intend to hopefully be fair. And
But until we get it on the table, we can't tell you exactly what those different
exactly right.
batches will look like.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, we'll try to knock off a few of these quite quickly because we're running out of time. But
There's a few I can deal with kind of at
Yeah.
once. There's a couple of questions around being an unregistered organisation or body or unincorporated. When it comes to contracting, you will need to be incorporated, whether that's as an LLC or as an incorporated society. There was a question there from
But you can apply.
You can apply without one, but if you were to be successful, it would be, the funding would be conditional on you creating a contracting party that we can contract with, which can be a limited liability company or a New Zealand incorporated company, or an incorporated society.
cool.
There's a question about whether you can submit a hard copy of a previous magazine. Unfortunately, no. The days of us receiving hard copies are well and truly past, and the difficulty we have is that it's not just being assessed internally within NZ On Air. We will get external assessors as well, and if we can't electronically link people, you don't actually have to attach a copy. If you host that content in a Dropbox or something and give us a link, then we can, you know, then everyone can actually access the content, but we don't have the facility to photocopy things and send them out to external assessors. That just is not feasible for us.
And does the application form allow for a submission on behalf of several small publishers who are wanting to establish a collaborative role?
Again, it kind of goes to the point that Connell just addressed. We would need a single contracting party if you were successful for funding. I think at the time of application, one person is going to have to register as the applicant, but within that application form, you can talk about, there are places where you can free write text and just explain what the structure of your planned project is. And you can certainly add additional platforms as well if there's, in the application form, there's generally a primary platform, so that's the commissioner, or publisher.
Yep.
So that's the kind of the main place that the content will be distributed, but then there are opportunities for additional platforms to also distribute that content, and you can kind of, so depending on what the project is, if you've got a query, again, just pick up the phone and ask us or send us an email, and we can kind of talk through the specifics of your particular project.
And again, collaboration is really encouraged.
Yeah,
both at the large sort of national level and at the micro community level. That's kind of, yeah, written into the DNA of this, I think, as well.
There's just a quick one on budgets for stage one. We're looking for a top line budget breakdown or the usual budget. It's a fund that's likely to have multiple applications. The more detail you can provide at this early stage, the less questions we have. And it's only going to strengthen your application to provide as much detail as possible. So one with, as you put it, all the bells and whistles, that would be our preference, even at this early stage.
Cool. The next question on there is, could you provide us with some further examples of where you would perceive content as too similar to be considered fulfilling the brief of diverse or covered in the normal course of events? to tighten up our understanding of what is already being produced that we should not make application for. Ngā mihi. You want to?
There is a list of examples in the general guidelines available on our website of what public interest journalism is not. Just off the top of my head, like, coverage of the All Blacks, for example, although very interesting in my point of view, that is well covered by mainstream news outlets. I think, sort of the national political scene is also an area which is well covered. Opinion pieces, of course, do not fit this definition. In fact, I really want to stress the journalism element of the Public Interest Journalism Fund. This is about going out and finding information, interviews. This is not punditry. This is not funding opinion. High profile crime, sensational headlines, celebrity news, those types, things in that realm, things of the, sort of the headline grabbers, those are not necessarily aspects of this fund.
Yeah.
Not that public interest journalism may evolve into something that becomes a national issue, but things that are already reported on ad nauseum are not eligible.
And you're probably looking at that difference of public interest and in the public's interest. So, is the content in the interest of the public rather than is the information of interest to the public?
And just to quickly touch on the keyword there of diverse as well, and again, reflecting some of the inquiries I've dealt with, we have talked a lot about the emphasis on Māori and iwi journalism, but not to, there's a really important part here for journalism for ethnic communities in New Zealand that are not currently well served, and we at times in some of these documents, there is reference to Pan-Asian, for example, and Pacific Island audiences, but that's not an exclusive list. And we welcome applications from media who are serving ethnic communities that are not currently well served.
Or to that matter, disabilities audiences.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Any communities of interest. Really.
Communities of interest. Yeah. Is the Public Interest Journalism Fund applicable for investigative reporting that includes content created to uncover affairs within the realm and sectors of New Zealand society and regions to create original content that an audience is interested in? This would require a somewhat team of journalists. However, for starters, it was proven to work with only 2 people creating that content, gaining a concurrent reach of thousands within a 2-week trial period from our platform. Oh, that was a big long question. Investigative reporting absolutely would fall within the project fund, project pillar, and demonstrate to us what your project is. That's what it comes down to. Investigative reporting absolutely is at a deficit and something we want to see more of.
Yeah. This hasn't specifically been asked, but it was something we were talking about the other day, and just in the interest of time, for project funding, the funding needs to be tied, as I said before, to some kind of content outcome. For audio or visual projects, this might be, a certain number of videos, each of which have a certain minimum duration, and then therefore a total minimum duration of however many minutes. Similar for audio. For print, it gets a bit more trickier, but what we have seen when we've been dealing with kind of accompanying print material for the audiovisual content we've funded out of the New Zealand Media Fund is there often might be a minimum number of articles with a minimum word count. So there might be a differentiation made between articles and features obviously, which are more longer form. But just so you are aware, we would expect to see some kind of deliverable, specified deliverable output. So that might be, for example, 10 by 800 word articles on a possibly a specific topic or theme to be released weekly, freely to a New Zealand audience, of course, I have to add. But just be aware that you shouldn't be going into the application shouldn't be making a kind of a general proposal for kind of vague content, we do want to see what exactly our funding would be producing at a later stage.
And that might include an episodic breakdown or.
Yeah.
We're going to try and whip through a few more before the end of this call. So just quickly, there's a question about whether anyone's available for direct one-to-one help regarding the application process. We will, as a result of today, reproduce the Q&A that's on the website with more questions and answers in there, including ones that we haven't got to today. If your questions haven't been answered there and you need some help with the application process, please just fire us an email through the journalism at inbox, and then we can triage and we can get one of the funding advisors to give you a call back and help you with that. And yeah, we'd prefer that way.
We can answer your questions. We can't kind of consult from the point of view of looking at your draft and giving you critiques on your application.
That's right. Yeah.
A, it's not fair, and B, we just simply don't have the time. But we'll try and give you as much advice and help through the process of submitting an application as we can.
Yeah.
Sorry, just in the interest of time, I wonder if it's worth answering question number 24. A small number of roles might be needed for a project, presumably if they are set for a time frame of the project. They would be valid in the, would they be valid in the first funding round and not have to wait for role-based funding? And the answer to that is yes. Within your project, you are allowed to have funding allocated within your budget for specific roles, such as a researcher, a journalist, a director. The role-based funding, to be clear, is about positions within a newsroom that would be embedded, that respond to arising stories related to public interest journalism. They are not attached to a specific content outcome. So these would be positions within an organization, roles within an organization that aren't attached to specific content outcomes. Project-based journalism funding, you can have budget allocated for specific roles in order to achieve the content outcomes that you are seeking. I hope that's clear.
Sorry, just another quick one. Questions about the amounts awarded. Do we need to apply for a specific amount? And if we do, can a different amount be awarded? Yes, you do need to apply for a specific amount. And we need an accompanying budget to show why you've arrived at that figure. There is a possibility that you may be awarded an amount less than the originally requested figure. And if that is the case, there might then be a subsequent conversation between yourself and New Zealand On Air around revising the scope of the content you've initially applied for funding for.
And it's not unheard for that it goes up a little bit as well if we think you've under budgeted. So yeah, it can go both ways, but
yeah.
All right. Is there a limit to the number of supporting documents that can be uploaded in our wonderful online application portal?
It's basically as many as you want, but I think if you're talking about this initial phase, then the kind of going with the letter of the intent of 5 pages, because yeah, the more documents if it just becomes crazy, the number of additional documents you put in, then that's not going to bode well for how we think about your application potentially.
But at the shortlist phase, would be more liberal with that.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. There's a question here about industry development. Is it fair to say that one role or a small number of roles might be needed to allow a training development initiative to happen effectively, and that roles would be reasonable to ask for within a training initiative idea rather than holding these for the roles pillar round? I take from that you're saying that you would need to
hire someone to
hire somebody to run the training
as a mentor for a group of mentees within an organization. I guess that's kind of what I read.
And that would be a valid cost within an industry development initiative.
I think so, rather than being a role-based fund. I think the role-based fund is for a new role that's designed to get a content outcome. That's my understanding.
Or not necessarily, that can arise, that can respond to a story,
right,
that can develop a story.
Yeah, but it's kind of outward facing rather than inward facing. Yeah.
But I mean, I would say that this situation is analogous to content funding, in that if you budget for a mentor, for example, that would be a perfectly valid budget line
And an IDF.
and an IDF application. So the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we answer this one about the tertiary student associations?
Yeah.
Yes, we did. Connell did.
We
Thank
did.
you. Sorry.
Right. Feeling
And
vaguely,
under
but-
registered and questions, right, we did that. Sorry, we're just trying to whip through to make sure we get to as many as possible.
There's one that's just come in. The content is specific, obviously changes from time to time, but would it be appropriate to the fund if it had a new outcome, if things changed per that topic, if it happened to die off?
Yes,
Yes, that would probably require consultation with our head of funding and probably the head of journalism when they start. If you know, if you can provide a solid justification and rationale as to why the initial topic of your public interest journalism proposal has deteriorated or died off, and be able to provide a solid case around this new area you're going to move into. That's probably the way we go about it and have
And
a
I think
discussion as
there's
to.
precedent for this if we can, you know, so for example, Stuff Circuit, Newsroom Investigates, even Patrick Gower on 3 are really examples of where we've approved funding for a batch of investigative pieces with a sort of a top line headings for us of what those will be about, but that as you know, investigative journalism and journalism per se
When
can-
COVID strikes.
can
you
change daily.
you
Yeah,
pivot.
that's right. And so you need to be able to pivot, and it needs to be topical. It needs to be about now. And so if you need to change course and let us know that you've changed course, then that's generally going to be fine, because obviously we want to make sure that this journalism is as topical and relevant and useful to New Zealanders as possible.
I just want to jump in real quick and just really make the distinction between the role-based and the content-based. I mean, for content-based, we are looking at specific stories, and of course, those may die off from time to time, but generally there's a really specific angle that's being chased there. With role-based, that could be a journalist performing their profession, following leads, and some stories may eventuate and some may not. I think with content-based journalism funding, you really want to be focused in on a topic, whereas role-based, the journalist has more free reign to kind of do as they wish and pursue whatever stories they want, which may or may
Within the framework of public industry.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're out of time and we've taken up an hour of your time. Thank you so much for the questions. They've all been great, and we hope that if we've missed any, we'll cover them off in the Q&A document. You'll get a follow-up email with a link to that and to this webinar for sharing with anybody else in your organisations that might need to know some of these answers. And we'll also use that journalism inbox to communicate with us if you need a bit more help, and we will try within the time frame that we have and within the resources that we have before the fund closes. And good luck, everybody. Looking forward to your applications. Ka kite.